Jake Collins sat alone in his cramped apartment, the silence weighing on him like a heavy fog. The space was cluttered with empty bottles and remnants of a life he once had. Just a few years ago, Jake was on top of the world, a successful financial advisor, a loving husband to Laura, and a proud father to Emily. But that world had crumbled around him, and now he was left with nothing but regret and a bottle of whiskey. His phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. A message from his sister, pleading with him to reach out. Jake stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pang of guilt. He hadn't spoken to his family in over a year, not since his addiction had taken over his life. It had cost him everything: his job, his marriage, his connection with Emily. He barely recognized himself anymore. He took a long, hard look at the whiskey bottle in his hand. The familiar burn of alcohol had become his only companion, the one thing that numbed the pain. But tonight, as he lifted the glass to his lips, something in him shifted. He felt a sudden wave of disgust. How much longer could he keep running from his problems? How much more damage could he do to himself and those he loved? That night, Jake made a decision. He couldn't continue like this. He had hit rock bottom, and if he didn't change, he knew it would only get worse. 2 weeks later, he found himself in a hospital bed after a night of heavy drinking. The doctor told him he was lucky to be alive, but Jake didn't feel lucky. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mother stood quietly by his side. She didn't say much, just a simple plea. "Jake, you have to get help." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left. He knew she was right, but the thought of trying to rebuild his shattered life felt impossible. How do you start over when everything has fallen apart? When you've hurt the people who loved you most? He wasn't sure if he was strong enough to face that reality. Every time he thought of calling Laura, shame overwhelmed him. His mind replayed scenes from their last fight, her teary eyes, her trembling voice asking him to stop before it was too late. But it was already too late, at least that's what he told himself. Just when Jake thought there was no way forward, an old friend appeared at his door. Ben, someone Jake hadn't spoken to in years, stood there with a knowing look in his eyes. Ben had been through his own struggles with addiction and had come out the other side. Without judgment, Ben offered Jake a lifeline, a chance to join a rehabilitation program that had helped him turn his life around. "You don't have to do this alone," Ben said, his voice calm and steady. Jake hesitated at first, unsure if he could face the challenge. But deep down, he knew this might be his last chance to save himself. The next day, with Ben by his side, Jake walked into the rehab center. The first weeks were harder than Jake could have imagined. Every day felt like a battle. He was confronted by his own guilt, the crushing weight of his mistakes, and the ever-present temptation to give up. But there was also a glimmer of hope, one that grew slowly with each passing day. Group therapy sessions forced him to confront his demons, but they also gave him a sense of belonging. For the first time, he realized he wasn't alone in his pain. Others had been through similar struggles, and they were fighting just like he was. It gave him strength. He listened to the stories of the people around him, and in their words, he found pieces of his own journey. But the hardest part was yet to come. As Jake began to make progress in his recovery, he knew there was something he had to do: face the people he had hurt. Laura and Emily had been the most important part of his life, and losing them had nearly destroyed him. But if he was ever going to move forward, he needed to try to make things right. Writing a letter to Laura was one of the hardest things Jake had ever done. He didn't know what to say, how to express the depth of his regret. But he poured his heart onto the page, apologizing for the pain he had caused and asking for a chance to see Emily again. Weeks passed with no response, and Jake feared that Laura would never forgive him. But one day his phone rang. It was Laura. Her voice was soft, cautious. "I got your letter," she said. "Maybe it's time we talk." That conversation was the first step in what would be a long, difficult road to rebuilding trust. Seeing Emily again for the first time in over a year brought tears to Jake's eyes. She had grown so much, and he realized how much of her life he had missed. He knew he couldn't make up for the lost time, but he could start fresh. The process of repairing his relationship with Laura and Emily was slow and painful. There were moments of doubt, moments when it seemed like the damage was too deep to heal. But Jake was determined. He wasn't doing this just for them. He was doing it for himself. He had spent too many years running away from his problems, and now he was ready to face them head on. Day by day, Jake worked to prove that he had changed. He didn't just want to be forgiven. He wanted to become someone worthy of forgiveness. During this time, Jake started to learn more about what had driven him to his lowest point. It wasn't just the alcohol or the pressures of work that had caused his downfall. It was his inability to deal with his feelings, the fear of failure, the anger he carried for years, and the guilt that had eaten away at him. In rehab, Jake had learned that facing his emotions instead of burying them was key to real healing. He started practicing meditation, trying to stay present rather than obsess over the past or worry about the future. Each day was a struggle, but slowly, he began to understand that self-forgiveness was just as important as seeking forgiveness from others. As time passed, Jake reached out to others he had wronged along the way, colleagues he had disappointed, friends he had abandoned. Most of them were shocked to hear from him. Some ignored him, but a few responded, cautiously willing to reconnect. Jake took it in stride, understanding that rebuilding bridges was a slow process, one that would require time and proof of his changes. And while some relationships couldn't be salvaged, he found peace in knowing that he had tried. He wasn't seeking perfection anymore. He just wanted to live honestly and with integrity. Standing on the balcony of his apartment one evening, Jake looked out at the city lights. His life wasn't perfect, but it was real. He was no longer hiding from his mistakes. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The future was still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt ready to face it. He breathed in deeply, allowing himself to embrace the present moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he had the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time.